and wow, what a lot of activity we've seen over the weekend. Now, the last time we talked to you, they'd already traded for Robert Covington. They traded for Ned Cantor. And then over the weekend, they went and they signed Derrick Jones. They signed Harry Giles. And they brought back Rodney Hood and Carmelo Anthony. So we're going to dive into all of that. But before we get to that, let's talk just in general, big picture snapshot of how we feel Neil O'Shea handled and executed this offseason. Joe, you go first.
Am I supposed to give you like a golf clap for getting Harry Giles Jr. right, or are we gonna go straight to that?
You have no idea how pleased I was with that.
Look, I think it was a fantastic offseason for Neil O'Shea. I've been as real and critical when needed of him over the years as anyone, and I praise him when he deserves it, and he deserves universal praise right now. And I think he's received universal praise from the pundits across the NBA landscape. He filled the biggesse position of need, obviously, with Robert Covington, as we've talked about in previous videos. And then he went out and filled more or less all the other needs that this roster had. He significantly bolstered the defense, which was their overwhelming biggest weakness last year. He added depth. He added athleticism. He added versatility. He added playoff experience. He kind of check all the boxes along the way. Now, I don't think it was a perfect offseason. He didn't get Jay Crowder, which was my number one target.
That was your guy.
So, but, he kind of got a guy in Derrick Jones Jr. I know we're going to talk about him later in the video, but he's a guy who doesn't necessarily mimic or mirror what Jay Crowder does, but can provide a lot of the same things and fill an important role. And he's younger and more athletic too. So, that kind of pacifies that. A little bit of an unknown with him. He's obviously younger and more up and down than Crowder has been. But, when you step back and look and another thing Neil never did bring in a backup point guard, which I know we'll also talk about later. So, we can't check that box. But, overall, looking from where we were a week ago to where we are now, it's hard to be too critical of an offseason that I think was overwhelmingly successful.
Right. And I agree with you 100%. Look, I think most fans would love to have seen them go out and either make a trade or sign a marquee free agent, a big time name that's going to come in here and be on Damian Lillard's level. And then you start feeling like you're more of a contender. But sometimes in Portland's history, that just doesn't happen. There has to be a player available. Someone has to want what you're offering, and then you make that happen. Those things actually don't happen as often as people think. I mean, people see them happen, but it's only a couple times a year. It's not like 2018 went out and got a marquee free agent and the Blazers just stood pat. These things are tough to come by, especially for a small market team, which Neil O'Shea alluded to in his press conference the other day. Like, we don't attract those types of players. So what you have to do is you have to be wise, smart, deft, pick your spots, and address your needs. And I think he did that. I don't think anyone can say he did not do that. And the perimeter defense thing is real. I mean, they were 27th in defensive rating last year. You added two guys in Covington and Jones who are going to answer that for you and still bring some offense. So I think he did a great job. I don't see how anyone can complain about this offseason. It seems like, based on Twitter, which, I don't know how accurate that is in terms of measuring the pulse of Blazerland, but most people seem to be excited, and some people think they're contenders. So, I would say he did a good job.
One thing too, but before we press on, is just based off our talk with Robert Covington a couple
Wasn't
days
he fantastic?
ago, he could not fit this Blazers culture and chemistry better. And as I was listening to him and his message, I was called to think about back in time to a ballroom in Las Vegas at Summer League when the Blazers introduced Hassan Whiteside. Mm-hmm. And I recall asking Hassan, kind of what his expectations were for the upcoming year and kind of his goals and such. And he said to lead the league in blocks and rebounds. And, hey, good on him. And it was a notable goal, but it was about Hassan Whiteside. His answer was about Hassan Whiteside. And Hassan Whiteside's tenure here was mostly about Hassan Whiteside. What struck me in contrast, listening to Robert Covington, was that dude is in it to win it. He was talking about, he does little things that don't show up on the box score. He doesn't care about stats. Total polar opposite to Hassan Whiteside. So knowing his backstory, judging based upon, the tenor and the message by which he spoke, I feel like he even further bolsters that idea that he is a perfect signing and a perfect fit for this team. And I think he is just going to integrate perfectly and into this franchise. And, maybe down the road, a guy who might want to stay here beyond his contract. Now that's getting ahead of ourselves, but I was just kind of struck by that, looking at those two kind of moments.
Okay.
All right. So now, I guess we need to, as we move forward, we'll get back into the big picture of the roster and
we'll talk about that later.
But let's kind of briefly go down a few of the notable additions, and let's start right at the top. The Blazers' biggest free agent acquisition, the player they used their mid-level exception on, Derrick Jones Jr., a guy who played with the Miami Heat last year, up and down solid in the regular season, kind of tapered off in the postseason. How did you feel about that signing? He was on neither of our kind of target lists.
Yeah, you were looking at Crowder. I was looking at Millsap maybe. And then they signed Derrick Jones Jr. And I'm just like, oh, okay, whatever. But, like we're supposed to do, we need to go do our research on these guys. I admit I didn't know all that much about him. So I went and looked into him, and you could see why they are attracted to him, because he offers you that slashing, athletic, high flyer, going to the basket. I'm looking to dunk it on everybody. And whenever he dunks the ball, I watch his highlight video. Every time he dunks, he's like, he's just letting everyone know. And I asked him about that yesterday. And he said, I want people to know. I just dunked on you. And so he brings that tenacity and aggressiveness. And then he's a great defender out on the perimeter again. So he and Covington are going to provide the defense out there while Dame and CJ and Nurk are orchestrating the offense. And these two don't necessarily need the ball. They know they're going to be fourth and fifth options. And they're fine with that because they're going to bring other things to the table. One side note, though, his three-point shooting isn't there. He's about last 2 seasons 30 and 28%, but he's only 23. He's super young. He was an undrafted free agent, and he's working on it. And I asked him about his three-point shooting, and he said, people are going to, something along the lines of people are going to be surprised that, that's coming along. He's been working on it. So we'll see what that means, but he seemed to be indicating that's something he's continuing to work on. And if he can get that up, even 32, 33% range, that makes him definitely more of a viable all-around weapon. But I think, I was trying to think, and you've covered this team for 14 years, the last player I could think of who played meaningful minutes, who really could bring you that athletic down the lane, dunk it in someone's face, maybe some of Rudy Fernandez, but I always remember Rudy more fast break guy and alley-oop, not necessarily physically going down the middle and dunking on people. I'd have to go back to Bonzi. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's going to definitely add an element this team hasn't had.
Yeah, I can't think of anybody, off the top of my head that is just Nasir Little certainly possesses similar athleticism, but he was a rookie last year and not a key player. And there's been some guys, come through over the years with just ridiculous feats of athleticism, but I can't think of a guy, who's brought in to fill an important role at an important time with that kind of makeup. And, this, like you said, and man, if I could dunk like Derrick Jones Jr., I would be wanting people to hear it too. So I respect that. Now everybody comes in and says their jumper is going to get better and we're going to work on it and all that. So we'll wait and see. The proof is in the pudding. But a guy, you figure playing alongside the guys that he's going to be playing with, he should get a lot more open looks, than he maybe has in the past. And at worst for the Blazers, if he can bump up that corner three, if he can get that to a respectable range, that combined with what he's going to bring you slashing to the rim, kind of like Mo Harkless did, filling that backdoor role, that cutting role, while everybody on defense on the other team is keyed on Dame and CJ and swarming Nurk and now getting out maybe to defend Robert Covington. There's going to be some avenues and some lanes for Derrick Jones Jr. to burst through. And so it'll add a different dimension, kind of just creating another dynamic for an offense, which, and I think we've talked about this before. Offense isn't a problem for this team. It's defense, and that's the role that he's going to fill. And I was a little surprised to hear, not all out, not completely sold by Olshey, but intimating that he expects DJJ to start. And and obviously that'll be up to Terry Stotts, but you wonder about Rodney Hood and his role in that. And you look at Covington, who can play the 3 and the 4. I think tentatively going into the season, we're looking at a Dame, CJ, Derrick Jones Jr., Covington, Nurkic starting lineup,
Exactly.
which is interesting.
Yeah, and Zach, he said Zach might be out until third week of January, so that leads to that. So we'll see how things shake out when he comes back. But yeah, that's what he's saying. I mean, if you give the guy 2 years, $19 million, I think it is. I think you're expecting him to play heavy minutes, and they want his defense on the floor. So it's going to be fascinating to watch how that lineup shapes out. Now, speaking of lineups, we all wonder what would happen with Carmelo Anthony. This is an all-time great, 10-time All-Star. He didn't have any offers last year, so he ended up, not on the team for a year. Blazers scooped him up to help them after Zach Collins got injured. He obviously maybe didn't receive a better interest this offseason than what the Blazers are offering. They got him for the minimum, which I think for a 10-year or 12-year veteran, whatever he is, I think he's like 14 years, right? It's like 2.9 million, 2.6, something like that. He accepted that, and he's willing to be a backup. What do you think of that move?
Oh, it was an outstanding move, and Melo doesn't care about money. He's swimming in money. So he's not chasing dollars right now. He's chasing clearly comfortability, right fit, culture, and I think a chance to win. And I think he really, as we've talked about in the past, he was enamored and kind of fell in love with this organization, and in part because of the opportunity they gave him, but in part because of his experience here and how that's went and how things unfolded. And, I think as we talked in the past, I was skeptical of his return because I wasn't sure that he was willing to accept a role that wasn't a starting role. Exactly. Well, Neil Olshey was asked about that and discussed that and said that the Blazers talked to him about that. And kind of the old adage, it's not how you start, it's who finishes, sort of, or not who starts, but who finishes. And it could be a guy who goes back to that closer role that we saw him do so well in the bubble. So I was surprised to see him come back because I thought he wanted a starting role. I'm not surprised to see him return because of how much he liked it and how forcefully he talked about how much he liked it. So really, Neil Olshey called it one of the most important signings of the offseason. And I don't know that that's the case when you look at on the court and what he brings. And I'm not to belittle what he brings on the court, because he will bring quite a bit. But fit, locker room, that veteran sage guy, he's among the most respected and beloved players in the NBA among his peers.
Yes.
And you can't discredit what that means and the impact he can make behind the scenes. And so just another kind of a home run, it's a signing, but a return for Olshey and the Blazers, and a guy, Dame and CJ have tried to get here for years, finally get here, and now he will stay at least one more season.
Yeah, I just love this from so many different angles. First, it always bugs me when people say that stars hold on too long because they're no longer the mega stars they once were. Therefore, they're tarnishing their legacy. I think that's BS. It depends on how the player handles it. I have no problem with a marquee star later in his career taking a secondary role and still playing and contributing. I think that shows such an abundance of character. I think that enhances your legacy. The fact that this guy who was such a ball-dominant player for so long is willing to basically be a bench guy for this team speaks volumes about him and squashes all the nonsense about him being a cancer, all that crap. He was never a cancer. He was a ball hog, but he was never a cancer. And I would have been a ball hog in New York as well. Plus the fact Neil Olshey talked about, look, if we play him 20, 22 minutes, and mostly with the second unit, he's going to be the one or two option with that unit. He's probably going to get more touches and more looks than he would being on the court with Dame, CJ, and Nurk. And then if he's hot at the end of the game, you have him to help you close. If he's not, maybe he's not out there. And then by playing fewer minutes, he's able to play more often back-to-back and not wear out. And you can manage his contributions as the season goes along. So I just love it. And all these players grew up loving him. Like I think, who was it? Who was it that said just the other day? Was
Giles?
Who said he grew up with Carmelo's posters on his wall? Wait,
I think it was Giles. Yeah.
Or Neil Olshey talked about posters on the wall, and someone talked about growing up. Oh, he wrote a second grade project on him. That's what it was. Mm-hmm. He did a school project on this guy, and now he's playing with them. Like that is going to permeate throughout the entire team. They're going to love just having him around, even if he's just a backup. I take that back. Even if he's a backup, a sixth man or whatever, he's Carmelo freaking Anthony. These guys are going to love having him around. And when he speaks, people are going to listen, and that's going to mean a lot. I love the signing.
And when you look at his fit, he's not like he was last year, he's not the third option or the fourth option. He's like your sixth, seventh, eighth option. And that speaks, I think, to the quality and depth of this team.
Exactly. Okay. You're leaving the next one.
I am?
Odd number. We're still working out our formatting, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, but I'm supposed to transition to this is going to be
right. You're supposed to bring up the next one, and then I go. All
right, that sounds good. It kind of, I think,
when you put newspaper guys on video, this is what happens.
I think a move that we both expected, and I think we kind of predicted with, I think I called it a wink-wink handshake. The Blazers did bring back Rodney Hood after he declined his player option, kind of making good on him taking a well below market deal 2 years ago. And, a lot of questions surrounding him, but how do you kind of view his return at this point?
I think at first when you think, okay, they bring back Carmelo, they sign Jones, they sign Covington, Hood becomes redundant in a way, but it just bolsters the depth. And Doc Collins is going to be out for a while, so you have another guy that you can go to, can play multiple positions. I think it's great. He blossomed here. He loved being here. I think it definitely does not hurt you in any way, and he's still a young player. I was a little shocked that Neil was insisting he was going to play a lot of play some two guard because you have CJ and then of course Trent, but. Hey, if he's going to give you some minutes there, great. But no, I think it's great they brought him back for him and for the team because he's another guy who has bought into being here. He has said numerous times how much he loved playing in Portland, and he seemed to come into his own last season. You can't hate this at all.
Yeah, and a guy beloved among his teammates and a guy who loves being here. And so not at all surprised to see him return. I guess we'll see how he is physically. Obviously coming off the Achilles injury.
Neil says he'll be ready, but we'll see.
Yeah, and we probably should have noted a couple, highlights or notes earlier. Zach Collins, Neil says, is not expected to be ready till mid-January, as you mentioned.
Right.
Rodney Hood is expected to be ready by opening night, or at least is tracking toward being ready then. So, and I know you have kind of questions about roster duplication and too many forwards, but there's also questions with Zach and questions with Rodney, and particularly Rodney. And we've seen hit and miss histories with guys coming off of Achilles injuries. And so I think he's young enough and talented enough that he can come back. But it's probably going to be a slower process than he would like. And so you add these other guys to kind of fill in until he comes back or to see how that goes, just different weapons. I think that makes a lot of sense. And, a guy who was shooting almost 52% or 50% from three before his injury was playing solid defense. So it's really a solid signing. And, we didn't talk about this with Carmelo, but, when he came out so forcefully in the bubble and said that he wanted to return to Portland, it spoke volumes about the franchise and its appealingness to the rest of the league. It's not known as a free agent destination, obviously. I think that helps that. When an organization treats Rodney Hood as they've done, fans kind of go, why would you pay double the money for a guy that, blah, 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 blah. Well, people around the league pay attention to that stuff. Front offices, agents, and players. Word gets around about how teams treat their players. When you sign a guy for below market value and apparently say, hey, we'll reward you down the road, and he snaps his Achilles, less than midway through the season, and then you come back, he declines his player option, and you sign him to more money for more years, that really speaks volumes about how you treat players, and that can only bolster the Blazers' attractiveness, moving forward.
Definitely, and given his situation, it's an Achilles. Those things can be really weird. We all know that. Zach Collins not coming back. It made total sense for them to sign a bunch of forwards. I had no problem with that when I asked Neil O'Shea about that. My only thing is later in the season, if everyone's healthy, minutes are going to be tough to come by. But we can talk about that down the line. So let's shift gears now to Harry Giles. Now, Giles on my list, I told you I had a fantasy list, and I had two younger players who had not worked out in terms of Giles and Josh Jackson. Should Portland make a run at one of those two? I then took Giles off my original list because he's a center and they had signed Cantor. But when they signed him, I was like, yes, because this is one of these guys that fascinates me. He had the major knee injuries in high school that hurt him at Duke. He sat out his first year at Sacramento because they wanted him to strengthen that knee. He's been playing some the last 2 years. And when he started last year in March, he played a lot, averaged 12 and 6. in only 20 minutes. He's also a really good passer. So I love the fact that they brought him on. Do you think he's going to be able to contribute to this team given all the big guys that they have?
Well, I think there might be a limited role for him at the beginning of the season. As Zach works his way back, I think that kind of opens the door for him to play. But we'll have to see how things shake out. When I look at this signing, this was kind of a minimum guy they signed to one of their last roster spots. Or I guess it would be their last open roster spot. So it's not a guy you're heavily invested in. It's a guy with high upside that you take a chance on. And, as we've talked about before, Neil Olshey has a pretty strong track record with reclamation projects, or with helping guys improve and get to where they want to be. And kind of so many guys have come through and then gone on to score big contracts elsewhere afterwards. So player development, we've talked about that before, and we'll continue to talk about that moving forward. So a guy who fits that mold, a guy who could come in and surprise or be better than, maybe anybody expects, assuming he's healthy. But there are those red flags at those knees, and Lord knows Portland has all kinds of red flags when it comes to knee trouble. I remember Harry coming through for a pre-draft workout, and I was skeptical then, and it's nice to see him at least get healthy and get a chance in the league. So we'll see. It's a I don't know, a low risk, high reward kind of signing, which is the exact kind of signing you want, where they signed him and for the amount they signed him with.
And if you haven't yet, Blazer fans, go on YouTube, find his highlighted video from mostly from last season. Tons of great passing from this guy. He gets into the high post. Guys are cutting back door. Guys are getting to the three-point line or whatever, and he's finding it with no-look passes, lobs, bounce passes. It'll be interesting to see if the Blazers can utilize that.
Yeah, and one thing that the Blazers didn't do this offseason that I really kind of wanted them to, and going back to the bubble in Orlando, I thought against the Lakers in the playoffs, they were kind of exposed for not having that additional ball handler to take pressure off Dame and CJ when things got tough. That was why they signed Evan Turner a few years ago to begin with. I didn't think that – I thought that Neil would go out and sign an Austin Rivers or a J.J. Barea, not necessarily J.J., but someone like that, a vet guy who can come in and fill that role. Well, it turns out that because of luxury tax issues, not wanting to go into the tax and be a tax repeater, the Blazers are just underneath the luxury tax threshold. They want to avoid those repeater penalties. Neil elected not to do that, not to fill a 15th roster spot, and he elected to go big with your boy Harry Giles Jr. instead of that backup point guard. So, and as a result of that, when he was asked about backup point guard, he said, "We have one. It's Anfernee Simons, and he will fill that role again." What was your take on that?
I love it. I could see why you might want a veteran in some respects, because clearly last season they didn't have a lot of confidence in Simons in high leverage situations. He had some DNPs in the bubble or some 2-minute performances. He was inconsistent. So clearly it was like, well, they're not really believing in him, so maybe they were going to go get a vet. But at the same time, he's so talented. He's so young, and you give so many minutes to CJ as the backup quarterback, the backup point guard. And Neil talked about that. He said 95% of our possessions, one of those two is the point guard. So why am I going to go spend money on a minimum veteran point guard who's not going to be better than Anfernee, or probably be less than Anfernee? And they need to continue developing Anfernee. Now, I will say this. If Simons doesn't come along and doesn't mature and doesn't grow, I could totally see a scenario where they go out and get one at a later date, either via trade or what have you. They have the open roster spot, right? So this is a showing of support and belief in Simons that he's going to take a big step. I think they need to show that in him, and he needs to deliver.
And he has the ability to. If you had talked to Neil at any point over the last year and a half, going back to 2 off seasons ago, the way that he talked about Anfernee Simons was on par with how he valued Damian Lillard coming out of the draft. I mean, they think so highly of him, and apparently what he does behind the scenes at practices is just outstanding, because the players also speak that highly of Anfernee. And he's still so young and still teeming with potential, and I think there is a tendency, particularly among fans, to cut bait and run and to give up on guys far too early. And it's kind of the easy thing for talking heads to do, to pinpoint stuff like that too. And you don't trust and believe in your player development scheme and department, and then, cut a guy before he even gets a chance to deliver on his promise. And so last year didn't go well for Anfernee. It certainly didn't go as well as the Blazers thought, not according to their plan. But that just kind of sets the table for him now to deliver on that potential. I still remain very high on him. I know the organization does. We'll see if he's a 1 or a 2, if he can be that backup ball handler. I think, potential aside, that is the biggest question with him. Can he, facilitate an offense and run an offense? Now, the way the Blazers play, often staggering Dame and CJ, it might not be quite as important. I mean, the majority of their time on the court, the Blazers' time on the court, is spent with one of those two stars, leading and directing the offense. So it's not quite as important. But again, they were exposed in the Lakers, and they have been exposed in the past for that when defenses especially tee up on Damian Lillard. So it will at the least be something to keep our eye on this season.
Definitely. Okay, let's move on now. We talked about the latest additions, and of course, we had the additions before the draft and before free agency started. Now let's get into sort of how we see this roster fleshing out. A lot of moving pieces, tons of versatility. We know Zach Collins isn't going to be back until mid to late January, which means Covington's going to be at the 4, Jones starting at the 3, CJ, Dame, Nurk, and then a bunch of bench guys who are interchangeable. It's going to be fascinating to see what Terry Stotts does with this. How do you feel about the overall gelling of this group, perceived team chemistry, and how they're going to be able to use these players to win basketball games?
Yeah, well, kind of going back to talking about Covington and his apparent unselfishness and team first kind of attitude. I'm assuming based on what Neil puts a priority on with culture and quality of character in his players, that won't be an issue with this team. That playing time and minutes won't necessarily become an issue, won't become a problem. And, over the years, I've watched Brandon Roy's career be derailed by knee injuries. I've watched Greg Oden's career get derailed by injuries. I've watched Wesley Matthews' Achilles snap, Rodney Hood Achilles snap. I've seen too many. Joel Prisbilla's gone down, and I could go on down the list. There was a 50 or 49 win team in maybe 2011 or so, in which the Blazers started Juwan Howard, who was supposed to be a veteran sage at center, because they led the league in injuries. And so I don't pay any attention to, there's too many players and not enough time or any of that. If I were a fan, I would much rather have too much talent than not enough talent. And hey, Let's just go back to last year. The only reason Melo's here is because the Blazers were desperate and signed him in November, off of his couch. They had so many injuries. So, I would much rather have, quote unquote, too much depth than not enough again. And especially when you're talking about the modern NBA, that is a positionless league that values versatility and the different lineup combinations and so on and so forth. The Blazers can go big with Cantor and Nurkic playing together, and Covington at the 3 if they want to get crazy with that lineup. They can go small across the board. They have a wealth of options to go to. Now, all that said, this puts a lot of pressure on Terry Stotts to push the right buttons, to come up with the right combinations, to massage egos and keep guys happy, because no matter how good of a guy you are or how embedded you are in culture, we all have emotions and people want to play. So I don't think it's going to be a problem, but it does need to be managed by Stotts behind the scenes. But again, there's a lot of talent on this team and a lot of guys who can play a lot of positions. And I think that versatility and that athleticism is paramount in today's NBA. And so, I don't see a problem with it. I think it's a plus.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I pretty much agree. I think that the attitudes of these players are correct. And you have some guys who are either coming off an injury, or Carmelo, who's 36, going to be 37, to where there shouldn't be too much belly aching. But I'm just going to say, if there comes a point where everyone's healthy, there's just no way someone's not going to be happy. I mean, imagine if you're Gary Trent, you had your breakout in the bubble, and now all of a sudden you're the 3rd or 4th option at small forward, and the 2nd or 3rd option still at the 2 guard and you're getting 12 minutes. Is he going to be happy with that? Is Hood going to be happy if he's playing backseat to 2 other people? It's just going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I hope it doesn't implode or anything like that, but I just wonder. It'd be interesting to see how Terry Stotts manages that. That said, wow, the different combinations you can do with this team, the way you can go at people. I mean, if you want to go big, if Collins isn't that back, put Cantor at the 4. Imagine if you want to go all defense. Let me ask you this. Let's say you need a stop. Late game, you need a stop. Does CJ come out and you put Jones at the 2, Covington at the 3, Collins at the 4?
Throw Trent in there.
That's what I said. What did I say?
You said Jones.
Yeah, I mean, Jones is another one you can put out too, but I'm just saying Dame's not coming out. So I'm saying you go Dames, Jones, Covington, Zach, Nurk, or you could go Dame, Trent, Jones, Covington, Nurk. My point is, would you take CJ out and go with an all defensive unit for that marquee stop? And then, okay, we got the stop. Now we in the basket. Let's get CJ back out there. Let's get Carmelo out there. Take out Zach. Like, there's so many different things they're going to be able to do with all these different guys.
Yeah, and in fact, that's interesting you bring that up because we saw that in brief stretches in the bubble. Terry did do that. He pulled CJ and put in, I want to say it was.
Did he pull CJ? He pulled CJ?
There was one game, and boy, I can't come up with it off the top of my head, but where there was probably 2 or 3 possessions in a tight game late where he put CJ in and out because of defense. And I want to say it was Gary Trent, but I couldn't say for sure.
It probably was Trent.
It gives you options in those situations. If you're going to call a timeout anyway after a defensive stop, why wouldn't you?
Right. Yeah, and they can go big if they want. They can just, and then Cantor, like the thing about Cantor, for all his deficiencies on defense and for whatever reason he hasn't been able to find a home, that guy, when he is on the court, is a stat monster. Like, he's getting rebounds. He could put the ball in the basket. It's such a great addition because you don't have to worry about playing Nurk a ton of minutes. Nurk has never played 30 minutes a game until the bubble. That was his first time ever. I think 31.5 over 8 games he played. It's the first time he's ever gone over 30 minutes. And I don't think they necessarily want to get him into the 35-minute range anyway. So now you have a guy that you can go to who, when you put him out there for 15, 20 minutes, is literally going to score 12 points and get you 6 or 7 rebounds. And that's such a luxury to have.
Yeah, and we're looking at a season that is condensed into 72 games, and it's going to go fast. The games are going to come faster than normal because of the condensed nature of the season, because it's starting so late. And man, I sure would like to have more depth and not enough depth under that environment. It's a situation in which, for whatever defined role and defined time you have as a player, you can go ham in that defined time during the game. You don't have to save anything for the end. You know what I mean? So there you go. And, looking at the depth and the makeup and the nature of the roster, and I think it's as versatile and interchangeable as any roster I've seen in 15 years covering the Blazers. But it does remind me of a couple times. It was 2014-15, before Wesley Matthews snapped his Achilles. The Blazers, had just acquired Aaron Aflalo, and they were deep and good and primed. They were a dark horse championship contender. Ask anybody in the league, and they will tell you that. Wesley went down. That dream evaporated with his Achilles. And then it also reminds me, going way back to when I was but a young buck, 2008, 2009. Blazers 54-win team. They went 10 deep. They were
Evan Bayless and Fernandez guys.
Rudy Fernandez, Nicholas Batum, Travis Outlaw, Steve Blake was a point guard. It was a uber talented team. But the difference with that team is they were a bunch of babies, and they had never played. Not like Wham Wham Baby.
I know, not cry babies. Younger. Yeah.
I should clarify that because we've seen both.
Joe Freeman calls former Blazers babies.
So it was a baby Blazers team that had never played in the playoffs and didn't have that experience, and they got punked in the mouth in Game 1 against Houston and never recovered. Flamed out in the first round, and then injuries derailed things from there. The difference with that team and this team is loaded with playoff experience. You talk about Enes Kanter, he's gone to conference finals in back-to-back seasons.
Right.
Obviously, the Blazers 2 years ago, who's ever left from that went to the conference finals. Across the board,
just went to the finals.
Jones just went to the finals.
Covington's been deep numerous times,
Exactly. Go on and on and on. And you cannot stress how important that is for a team that is in win now mode, because man, the playoffs really separate the haves and the have-nots, and you have a whole bunch of guys who have in the past.
Okay, so that brings us to our last segment, our final flurry here. Okay, I've seen people talking about the Blazers being as good as number 2 in the West, a title contender, et cetera, et cetera. People are juiced up, not just locally, but nationally. People are saying these types of things. Where do you think all of these moves leaves the Blazers in terms of their chances to actually truly contend? I'm saying truly contend. I'm not saying they're going to be a dark horse minor threat and get to the second round, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying you're getting to the conference finals. You're pushing whoever you may lose to 6 games and being a threat. Can they get there?
You obviously don't know me, Aaron. I'm not one to go out there and make crazy proclamations off-season before game 1, before practice 1.
We can change them later. We can burn the tape and change them later.
I like to base my facts on evidence and especially things that I see on the court. The nature of the season ebbs and flows so much that one week the Blazers are going to be the best team in the NBA, and the next week they're going to be a bunch of bums. You just wait. I will say this. I firmly believe that based on the offseason we have seen, the additions that have been made, the depth and the versatility of this team, the leadership of this team, the track record of the guys on this team, that they are primed for a top 4 finish in the West. Okay. Now, I don't know how that slots. A lot depends. We're talking about injuries and health. We're talking about chemistry, if that maintains, and guys buying into roles. We're talking about the rest of a very deep West. So a lot of factors play into that. But I do believe this is a top 3 or 4 team in the West, and that says a lot. That speaks volumes about how talented they are, because the West is no joke.
Okay. I went into the offseason thinking borderline not playoff team, like anywhere between 6 and 9. And after the moves, I was initially going to go firm 5 or 6, but I think with Golden State losing Clay, I mean, that's just to me, that knocks them out of contention. I think the Blazers have a chance to finish 4th, maybe, but I'm going to go with 5th. I don't think they're better than the Lakers. I don't think they're better than the Clippers. I don't think they're better than Denver. Dallas is going to be fascinating to see how they mature and if Porzingis can be healthy. And of course, Luka Doncic is, just growing at leaps and bounds. It's just a ridiculously good player. So I'm going to say right now 5th in the West. I don't think they're going to contend for the title, but I think they're going to be hella fun to watch play, and they're going to win, make some noise in the first round, maybe beat the 4 seed or what have you, and then force the next opponent, the 3 seed, to actually it'll be the 1 seed, make them sweat a little bit, but ultimately lose in the second round to like the Lakers. But it's going to be a fun season and a fun team to watch.
No question, and they're primed for a good season. They're primed for a special season. We'll have to wait and see how that unfolds moving forward. Again, a team that's been, a franchise that's been snake bitten by injuries. You just hope everybody stays healthy. They're already entering the season with Zach Collins, a late arrival, but that's where that depth comes back. I'm telling you, all that, you can have too much talent out the window. It's a luxury, not a problem.
Absolutely. All right. We done? You got any other words of nuggets, words of wisdom, nuggets of wisdom, words of nuggets?
I don't think so. I'll just say that a couple things. Historically,
I don't think so. Just a couple things.
Under Terry Stotts, the Blazers have succeeded when expectations have been their lowest, when they've been a surprise team. So It will be interesting how they handle expectations. Because even in recent times, after their trip to the second round of the playoffs a few years ago, they flamed out the next year in the first round, a sweep to the Pelicans. So how do they respond to that? And then the other thing is, last year at Media Day, they were they carried a lot of bravado. There was talk about competing for a championship and talk about Anfernee Simons being the second coming and just a lot of that kind of mentality. There's 2 ways to view that it's good, they should be confident, or that, maybe they play it slow, let their play on the court do the talking. Damian Lillard has been one who has talked about making a championship real here, and that's his ultimate goal. That's been known. So I think you kind of have that mentality where, like, look, I've said that we're going to compete for a championship while I'm here. I don't need to go into expectations and predicting it right now. Let's let the season unfold and just play it slow. More my approach to things and less your approach to things. And championships and all that. Those are the last couple nuggets I'll say.
It's just preseason predictions. Doesn't mean. I mean, if I'm right, I'm gonna say, remember what I said back in December, November. If I'm wrong, I'm gonna be like, oh, I just said that in November. It didn't matter.
I was just talking.
Just talking. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We will be back. Camp starts next week, right?
December 6th, I believe.
Oh, camp's the 6th.
That's what I believe. That's what Olshey. It's a bit ambiguous. The Blazers.
What's the first then?
The first is when it can start around the league.
Oh,
and
okay.
I believe that because of COVID protocols and guys just coming, Neil said that they were going to start that on Tuesday. So I'm guessing there's X amount of days and tests you have to pass before all that's cleared.
That's
hypothetical that, or speaking of informed fact, because the league has not discussed it at length, but December 6th is what Neil intimated camp starting.
All right. Well, we'll probably come back with another a live video before camp starts. Thanks for joining us and have a great Thanksgiving.